Hi guys, thank you all for tuning in and welcome back to Sewing Clara. In this video I will show you how to create embroideries. Embroideries are a wonderful way of embellishing your pieces, even if you're creating something just of fabric scraps, just like I did with all these pieces. You can turn the things into something unique and special with just a little bit of thread, so it's also quite low budget. So I will show you how to create this flower embroidery on this little tissue hoodie and the paw print embroidery. And both these will then explain how I created the more complex embroideries on the remaining pieces. So let's jump right into this. We are going to start with a very simple embroidery. So I have here a piece of denim that I will use in order to make a tissue hoodie, for which you can find a tutorial also in this course. So just to give you an idea what it will look like, so I have here this tissue hoodie with a nice embroidery on the front side. Here we have the back side, and that's basically the section where the embroidery can be positioned. So I already marked the edges and now I want to mark the middle. So I will take my guide and I will connect the opposite corners like so. That's the easiest way, if you have a rectangle, how to find the middle without measuring. So that's the center. And I want to have here a simple blossom and a twig on each side. So I'm gonna mark the twigs. They're gonna look something like this. Let's make them semi-symmetrical. Doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but that's what I want to have. And here will be a blossom, and then I want each twig to have a few leaves. And for that, you need to know how to make backstitch and chain stitch, and that's basically all. So if you don't know how to make these stitches, there's a tutorial in this course, so maybe watch that video first and then you can return to this one. I already single threaded my needle with embroidery thread. I will make a little knot at the end of the embroidery thread, and then I will pinch the needle through from the wrong side, so that I will start here where the first twig will end, and I'm going to start creating backstitch. And the backstitch is going to be the twig. So I'm gonna always turn my work around. Since the twig is a little bit curved, I do recommend making the stitches a little bit smaller so that they are neat and so that they copy nicely the form of the curve, because if they were bigger, it would be kind of edgy and it wouldn't look so neat. So you have to play with that a little bit and see what length works for you the best. So now I created my twigs, and I'm still at the end of this twig, and I will create a few leaves. So for that I will do a few chain stitches. I make them rather larger, and I will make sure that I don't pull them very tight, because that way I can have nice leaves. So I will have one on this side and then one on this side. And then I will simply do the sew up on the wrong side. I accidentally pulled out the thread, but it's okay, I can thread the needle again. A little side note, ideally you would create the leaves in the places where you want to have them while you would create also the twigs, because then you wouldn't have to always start new and do the sew up. I honestly forgot about it when I started making the twigs, so please learn from my mistake, but it's okay, it works this way too. So let's do the sew up. So I'm just gonna pull behind the thread because the fabric is quite thick, and I'm just gonna wrap the thread around once. That's enough. The thread is quite thick, and I'm gonna chop it off. I am immediately going to make a tiny knot, and then I will turn my work around and I will create something similar on the other side. I don't really care if it's 100% symmetrical, it's okay. When you're making leaves, you can of course start at the point of the leaf instead of starting from the center like I did here. That is up to you, whatever works for you the best. Now we have 2 leaves there, and I think I will create more leaves, maybe like here. That would look cute. And maybe also here, but just on one side. Of course, like I said, this would have been so much easier if I started creating the leaves while I was making the twigs. But it's okay, mistakes happen to all of us. Plus, this way at least you see how to add a few leaves. If you would, let's say, create your twigs with leaves and then later you would decide you would want to have more leaves. So you can see that there is an option how to do it. So I'll do the last sew up and then we'll start creating the blossom in the middle. For the blossom, I double threaded my needle this time because I want the leaves of the blossom to be thicker. And I'm not gonna do anything else than simply chain stitch, which we used for the leaves, but I'm gonna create more around the center, more of the leaves. And just like with the leaves, I will make sure that I don't pull them too tight because I want them to be nicely rounded. But I will still make sure that they lay flat. So I'll play with it a little bit, pull on the thread until I'll be happy with the result. And now I finished my last leaf of the blossom, so I'm gonna turn my work around and I will do the sew up. So I'm gonna pull behind this green stitch, wrap the thread once through it, and then I will pull through again on a very small spot, pull this tight so that it's gonna be secure, chop this off, and then I will look on it. I will observe my work and see if there's anything I would want to add. I think what I would like would be a yellow center. So for that, I'm gonna grab this yellow denim thread. I tied the end. Now I'm just gonna go through the center and I'm going to stitch a couple of times in several directions until I fill a small spot with just the yellow thread. And I think that's enough. I want it to be rather subtle. It doesn't have to be huge. So I'm gonna pinch through so that I will come through the fabric on the other side. And I will do the sew up. And here you have it. Now, of course, if you wanted the twigs to be a little bit more visible, a little bit stronger, you could do chain stitch instead of the back stitch, or you could do 2 rows of back stitch. You could also double thread the needle. That is up to you. Whatever looks good to you, it's all about personal preference. There is no right and wrong. So the first embroidery is finished. Here is what the embroidery looks like once the tissue hoodie is finished. So it's actually, I would say, even subtle, but still pretty enough. You could of course create more twigs, more blossoms. You could add a few rhinestones or beads, whatever you feel like would improve your piece. For the second embroidery, I have here a piece of velvet. I want to have a paw print here, and this is, by the way, also going to be a tissue hoodie. So I'm gonna grab a pen, and I placed a cookie cutter on the velvet piece inside of the marks, and I'm simply going to copy the paw beans. So now we have these paw beans here, and I want to fill them out with black embroidery yarn. I single threaded my needle, I made a little knot and pulled the thread already through one of the paw beans. And now I want to fill the paw beans with multiple lines that will stay within the edges. And the technique is very similar to backstitch. So I will pinch through and come kind of back, and I will create my first line on the top, and then I will pinch very closely to the edge here on the left side, and I will come exactly through the edge, and I'm making sure that I'm very close to the place where I started with the first line. And then I'll go over to the other side, and again pinch through very closely, make one back stitch, pull the thread through, and pinch through so that you copy the edge on the other side, and then place the thread over, and then again make one tiny back stitch, next back stitch so that the needle comes through on the edge on the other side, pull the thread through. Make sure you don't pull this too tight, but it should be flat, and then place it on the other side again. And you will continue doing this until the entire paw bean will be filled with the black thread. This takes quite a lot of patience because it takes time. The bigger the spaces that you want to fill, the longer it takes. And now I made the last stitch on the bottom, and I realized that this edge is not so neat. So I pulled the needle through here, and I will make one stitch here that will fill the empty space. And now my first paw bean is done. So I will turn the fabric to the wrong side, and I will here do the sew up. I will make the smaller paw beans exactly the same way. And also, if you have a place that's a little bit bigger, in order to make nice edges, you can always go ahead and create a back stitch around the edge first. So let's do this together this way. So I just finished the edge with the back stitch, and I will start creating the lines that will fill the space the way we did it with the first paw bean. And this time it's quite easy because I have a clear edge. So I will always pinch the needle through, kind of through the middle of the thread that creates the back stitch. You can also pinch the needle through exactly behind it. That is up to you. See whatever looks better for you. I came to a point where my thread was too short and I had to retread my needle, so I pulled it through to the wrong side and I simply tied it with the end of the new thread. I'm gonna cut off the tail, then I will turn my work around. I will come through with the needle to the right side and I will continue doing exactly what I've been doing so far. So again, I'm just gonna create the lines and I will keep filling out the space of the bottom of the paw. As you can see from this point, instead of coming towards the edge on this side, I simply created a smaller section. That's something that's useful when you're creating bigger spaces where the lines would be too long and they would not lay nicely flat. Here it would not be a problem. I think this length for the lines would be okay, but I wanted to give you another option. So I finished this section and I will simply start moving here towards the bottom and do exactly the same and fill out the remaining empty spot. And I finished up the same way I made the first paw bean, these three, and my paw embroidery is finished. The important thing is that you don't go with the thread all the way through on the wrong side. What you want to see is this. You want to see small stitches between the sections or around the edge, because whenever you would pull the yarn through here on the wrong side, you would be basically wasting it. You want to have all the material that you're using here that creates the filled spaces. So, and here we have the paw print embroidery once the tissue hoodie has been finished. This is what it looks like from the other side. Definitely cute. I think that would be a great gift for anyone who has a dog or a cat. Here you have a few more ideas for a simple embroidery. So I have here these two embellished facial masks, for which you will find the tutorial also in this course. We have here this one with the sugar skull embroidery. So that's a combination of backstitch, chain stitch, and the stitch that I used when I created the paw print. So all these twigs, that's just backstitch. These sleeves and the blossoms are chain stitch. The edge is also chain stitch, and you will recognize this technique. We just did that for the paw print. That was basically it. This mask has a grid formed by chain stitch. I used denim thread. I double threaded my needle and that was it. And for this tissue hoodie, I used 3 different stitches, cross stitch for the edge, then 2 rows of backstitch in 2 different colors. That was denim thread again, so I have here 1 row made of the orange denim thread and 1 row in yellow, so that it would look a little bit more like 3D. And the little stars, that's just chain stitch. You will find the drawings for all the embroideries that you just have seen in the download section, so you can download that for free. Now let me show you these little helpers. So these tools are called either embroidery hoops or embroidery frames, and they are amazing for any type of embroidery where you want to be sure that you wouldn't tighten the fabric too much with the stitches so that the fabric wouldn't be pinched together. So remember, when we made this paw print, I had to make sure that I wouldn't be pulling too tight on the stitches so that the fabric would remain flat. And whenever you're creating something like this, especially if it's a little bit bigger embroidery, these are amazing. So I will show you how they work. Like with many other useful tools, the principle is very simple but very effective. So they consist of two hoops. You have a smaller hoop inside that's made of one piece, and then there is a bigger hoop that goes over the smaller hoop that's been cut, and it has a screw that you can either tighten or loosen. And then you simply grab the piece of fabric that should have the embroidery on, you put it on the smaller hoop, and then you pull this one over it and you tighten it with the screw, and that way this will remain nicely flat. The embroidery hoops come in different sizes. The sizing always refers to the inner diameter of the inner hoop, so they measure it from here till here. The hoops that you're looking at are 7 and 4 inches, so 7 inches would be 17 centimeters and 4 inches is a bit less than 10 centimeters. And the size of the embroidery hoop you will want will always depend on the size of the embroidery that you are planning. And another thing, sometimes it makes sense to grab the piece of fabric you have available for your project, position the hoop first, create your embroidery first, and then place your sewing pattern. An example would be, for example, this piece for my next facial mask that I'm about to create. So if I wanted to have the embroidery somewhere here or here or here, it would be very easy to use the already prepared piece and place the embroidery hoop on it. However, if I wanted to have the embroidery close to the edge, you can clearly see my dilemma, that wouldn't really work. So again, in that case, I would first create my embroidery and then I would place my sewing pattern so that the embroidery would be positioned where I want to have it. Alright, so that's how you can create embroideries. I find that embroideries are a really cute embellishment for so many pieces. You can basically create something fancy of nothing. All these pieces are made of just fabric scraps, but the embroideries make them look unique and special. Definitely something worth learning. I hope that you guys found this tutorial helpful and that you enjoyed watching it. Thank you all for tuning in, and happy sewing!